Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining me here today, where in these very difficult times, I thought there's never a better time than any for us to talk about mindfulness and how we can actually incorporate it into our lives based on what we're like and what our lives are looking like at this moment. Now those are my dogs sneezing in the background. They wanted to be a part of this as well. I'm going to be speaking, but if there are questions, please keep them coming. I'd like for this to be as interactive as possible so that each of you watching gets the most out of this. There's no set agenda, but the basic idea is that today is more of an introduction and just the smallest ways in which we can incorporate this, but also to understand what it's all about. And like I promised you, answering questions about, is it really this big life-changing thing that everybody's talking about, or is it the next big fad that's just going to go away five years later or even sooner? All very valid questions. So like I said, let the questions come in. But let me just start with a broad introduction. What is mindfulness? And is it as new as 3 years old? The answer is no. It's as old as 3,000 years old. It's really been incorporated in some form or the other in every philosophy almost, in every religious practice. And essentially, even the concept of karma in its various avatars speaks of this. What we're saying essentially is that the past is unchangeable, it's over, and a lot of our present thinking rests in the past, or we get anxious about the future, or we're thinking about the future, and we're spending so much of our time in the future, but we spend very little time in the present. And when we do that, and if we do that enough, we suddenly discover that a lot of the noise, the drama, the emotion that goes on in our head actually goes away. It's easy to say, don't regret things you did in the past, don't feel sorrow, don't long for things in the past. We are human after all. So how then do we bring things into the present? And equally natural, particularly at times like this, where it's uncertain, for us to start thinking about what's going to happen in the future, what's going to happen to humanity, what's going to happen to our country. And quite selfishly, we may think, what's going to happen to us? But these are very, very natural thoughts again. The question we need to be asking ourselves is, how helpful are these for how we operate? Yes, we need to be able to anticipate a little bit into the future, but far more importantly, we need to analyze where our present is. Because without what we know, we cannot move into the unknown. And we do so much of that, and hence there's all of this guesswork, these prophesizing, and these predictions of doom that are happening today. And most importantly, as has now been well documented through multiple studies, you can look these up online, but the impact of anxiety, the impact of regret, the impact of this sort of flood of emotions, not just on our mental well-being, but on our physical well-being as well. I'm not going to go into academic reports here, but you can easily look up effects of mindfulness online. There are some very, very well-regarded studies, including from universities such as Harvard and University of Massachusetts. So do go ahead, look those up if you need to understand that more. I'm focusing more on practical mindfulness and how we can actually incorporate this into our lives. Okay, so theoretically, we all know that we should try and stay in the present. It keeps us centered. It keeps us calmer. How does this keep us calmer? All right. What happens when we get anxious, or when we get regretful, or when we get swept up in a wave of emotion, is that we have hormones running through our body. We either get triggered into our fight, flight, freeze response, or we go into deep sadness, or we go into anxieties. All of this has one broad effect, which is that it sort of shuts down, or at least puts on standby, our thinking brain, our prefrontal cortex, which allows us to be imaginative, which allows us to analyze, which allows us to forward think without actually getting involved in that future thought. I don't know if I'm making myself clear with that. If you have questions, please do ask. Hello, and everybody, and thank you for those who are joining. Okay, so let's talk about whether it's going to be that big cure-all for everybody. Okay. Like with a movement like veganism, what tends to happen is that some people experience it, they experience some benefits from it, and they start enjoying that, and very quickly they become evangelists. So they think that because it's worked for them in the manner that it's worked for them, everybody should be doing it. Now, we know that this is a fallacy. This cannot possibly be true. Each of us is in a different place in our lives. We're unique individuals. So why don't we try and understand first what it is that we need, where we are, and therefore where we can go from there. Mindfulness in itself is one practice. It's a process of bringing your mind into the present with loving compassion. That's the part that leaders like Thich Nhat Hanh, the Buddhist taught, and in more secular philosophy, John Kabat-Zinn, you can look him up. He's considered the father of secular mindfulness, although Thich Nhat Hanh himself didn't really advocate this through any religious practice. And indeed, followers of his, like me, we do not necessarily subscribe to any particular religious following, but yet this practice has helped me, and I know thousands of others, a lot. Yes, it is a fallacy to think that merely incorporating a mindfulness practice will transform your life. It's like saying that, like chocolate is an aphrodisiac. You can eat all the chocolate in the world and you're not going to become a, who's the word? I'm thinking Machiavelli, but it's not Machiavelli. Who's that great lover? The fact is that we need to look at so many other things in our life when it comes to for an aphrodisiac to work, right? We need to be in good physical, mental health. We need to allow for our emotions to flow. We need to be stress-free. We need to have any kind of illness which would otherwise impact our sexual urges to be under control. So it's not as simple as just eating chocolate. Similarly, for mindfulness, there is a difference, though, which is that as with many practices, including with eating healthier, once you start incorporating that little practice, it sort of also has a domino effect on the rest of your life. Especially with mindfulness, because it relates to the brain and because it relates to activating your prefrontal cortex, it has multiple impacts on several other systems in our body, not just our hormones, not just anxiety, but even just in terms of healing, better sleep, and therefore impacting better relationships, better loving kindness towards ourselves, which allows us to be more fully present for ourselves and for others. So a little bit more powerful than chocolate for sure, but certainly not like the cure-all. There are times when our bodies and minds need the attention of experts. When we have mental disorders, when we have physical ailments, we do need to get the help we need. Mindfulness doesn't necessarily work for everybody. In fact, I had a client who she was working through a lot of agitation. And I remember her telling me very clearly in one session, Sandhya, whatever you do, don't tell me to take 10 breaths and calm down. Now, she was quite right in that she was just not in a place that she could say, breathe, sit down, and you're going to feel okay. But I'm happy to report that today she's found her own mindfulness practice. She's way ahead of me. And she reports into me and tells me how great it's going for her. So that brings us to the bottom line. This isn't an overnight miracle cure. It's literally teaching our brains a new habit. And what happens with a habit is that it's neither glamorous nor is it very exciting. What happens with a habit is that our new neural pathways are formed where information flows very quickly and without us having to think too much. So any kind of good mindfulness practice, once it gets established, you shouldn't have to struggle with it too much. Neither is it going to necessarily make you come out of it feeling, like you're walking on air and, you've self-realized in 20 minutes or whatever. So fair warning about that. Hello, everybody again, those who are joining. Let's think about where we need to start with. Okay, like I said, the best way for anything is to start with analyzing where we are. Okay, mindfulness involves us stopping a journey that's into the past, into the future, and consciously coming back into the present. Now, how we do that is with some sort of talisman, with some sort of a tool that can bring us back there, because it's not so easy to do, and we know how powerful our thoughts, our emotions can be. I'm going to quote again a yoga teacher of mine who'd used this not very politically correct description of the different forms of yoga, which is that he said that, look, when you're first starting, you're like a stubborn donkey. So you need somebody who's going to beat you or beat yourself to move your body into the various shapes that it needs to get into in order to be holding a particular asana. Okay, it's a little crude, but that's typically how anything begins, right? Whether it's working out or starting to play guitar or whatever. What happened the next step to the practice is that we start forming some sort of rhythm. It's not necessarily very graceful or poetic, but we're doing it, and there does seem to be some sort of count or system to it. As we practice more and more, we get into a flow, in that we have these brief moments where we simply lose track of where we are, who we are, we lose track of time, and we touch that little moment of desirelessness, that little moment of freedom from thought, which actually, if you will experience it, equates to bliss. It's as simple as that. And then, of course, to the great masters who've been practicing this for years, at some point you become that. There is no separation between a practice and you. You are the practice. Now, if it makes you feel any better, I have heard this from some of the great masters themselves. They also have moments where they feel agitated, they slip back. But what happens with regular practice is that we get better and better at pulling ourselves out of that and pulling ourselves into the present. And much more importantly, with the mindfulness practice, we're a lot more forgiving of ourselves. So the process is not to achieve perfection. The process is to simply keep failing forward. Now, how are we going to do this? And what is this talisman or tool that we can find to help us along? And why do people keep talking about the breath? Okay, is it there's some magical, mystical properties which you're going to inhale some sort of special air and become enlightenment and become the Buddha overnight? No, it is not. Okay, the breath, the science behind it is that it's partly on autopilot, in that you don't need to be thinking about it and you'll still breathe in and out, but also the breath changes with our moods, right? When you're tense, when you're anxious, you're going to be breathing a lot shallower, a lot faster, because your body's trying to get in a lot more oxygen. But the breath is also something that's within our control, and we can, with breath, actually help regulate our own moods. And much more importantly, the breath and our bodies are something that are always in the present. They can't be anywhere else, unlike our minds, which are monkey minds and can swing from past, future, everywhere and all around, merry-go-round. And that's why people use the breath so much. There are other talismans that you can use if you don't much enjoy the practice of breathing, especially to start with. We are going to use our bodies. We are going to use our senses. We can even use little talismans like beads. Some people wear a little bracelet. They just use that to remind themselves. You can use different aspects. Let's go through it a little systematically in the next few minutes. As I promised you, this is going to be only for 20 minutes long. If there are questions, I will take them. I will exceed the 20 minutes, but in the last couple of minutes, let's start with, we'll do breath meditation on another day, because it does take a little bit more thought preparation into that maybe. Today, I thought we could start with some simple things. Let's use our senses for today. Okay, so let's think about our sight. What can we possibly use with sight that can remind us? We just need something that will remind us that, oh, every time I look at this, I need to come back to the present. So any ideas for what we can use to bring us into the present? I'm going to give it a few. Tell me if you have any thoughts. Tell me something that you can look at that will suddenly say, okay, that's my cue to come back to the present. It's nothing very mystical. How about something as simple as a clock on your office or on your home wall? Each time you look at the clock, it's a cue. Okay, it is now 12:48. It's time for me to come back to the present. It's time for me to come back to myself. You're at a traffic light, it turns from orange to red. That's your cue to come back to the present. These are all visual cues. You can use notifications on your phone. There are wonderful apps like Calm, Chill, that will send you little notifications through the day. Typically, the ones that are red and sort of creating an alarm are not the ones that are very helpful. That will remind you to go into the present. Those are meant to remind you to go into that particular app. Okay, so keep your cues, your visual cues, neutral, something that you can create an association with to bring you into the present. Let's take another sense. How about sound? What are the sounds that we can use? Now, this is quite common in most religious philosophies. What sound can we use? Okay, a sharp breath in. We can use that for sound. Okay, just the sound of, okay, that's my sign. That's my sign. That's sound, that's breath, that's a lot of things combined, very powerful. What other sound? Your watch. Okay, yes. This is where you can use a beep. Again, as long as your beep is not something that triggers an alarm in you, that's not going to be helpful. Typically, you'll find most alarms are shrill, high-pitched. They're meant to create that sense of panic in you. So it can just be like a bell. You can download apps. There's an app called the Plum Village app, where you can activate a bell that will just, especially if you're working alone, like we are all doing now, to just chant just a small ding every 15 minutes. That sound will just remind you, and you will then recognize how much we are all over the place and how much we need to return. Okay, but nothing like something external at this point to remind you to come back to the present. So a bell, very powerful, especially one that you don't have to remind yourself to actually ring, because by then hopefully you're already in the present. But yes, and in your everyday life, tell yourself to make some cues. So for example, every time you hear the pressure cooker whistle, that's a reminder for you to come back to your present. Every time you hear a honk, instead of getting agitated by it, tell yourself, that's my reminder to come back to the present. Every time you hear a siren, typically a source for agitation again, but just remind yourself, I'm so grateful to be healthy. I'm so grateful to be alive. You can create whatever connections you want. It's your brain, and it is very, very powerful. How about touch? I'll keep smell for later, but how about touch? Do we have any ideas how we can use touch to remind ourselves? Any thoughts? Okay, touch can happen in many different ways. Again, something like beads. You can even use a piece of jewelry that you have. You have a ring on your finger. Just use that to say, you know what? I hold on to this and bring myself back to the present. It's literally like, and I've said this before, like in the movie Dumbo, there's the flying elephant who can't believe that he flies, and the two kids give him a feather to hold on to. It's not the feather that's making him fly, but that feather reminds him, or that feather gives him belief that he can fly. That's the basic idea. So beads, use your watch, use a bracelet, use fabric. Just before you get into bed, if you like the feel of your sheets, like the feel of your pillow, just feel. And different kinds, oh, okay, this is mirror image, so this is where it is. Feel different kinds of fabric and see, just allow that texture. When you're feeling the texture, it's very hard for you to be thinking about the future of the world as well at the same time. That's simple. Smell. Now, this is a little bit of a complicated one, because very often smells trigger a lot of memories for us. I don't know if you've ever experienced this, but even today, when I smell melons, for example, I think about my childhood in Iran, where there were like beautiful, fragrant melons in the market all the time, or the smell of naan, or, each of you, I'm sure, has got a memory associated with a particular smell. But we can create new associations, or pick the associations that remind us of our present. So the simplest is some sort of incense, or choose a particular perfume. Every time you spray that perfume on, and during the day when you get a whiff of that, that's your reminder. You need to consciously make that association, and very soon it'll become habit. Of course, you could run into problem when you run out of that particular perfume, but you guys are smart. I'm sure you'll figure it out. But smell is also very, very powerful a sense to create associations for ourselves and to file away these memories quite effectively in builds. Did I miss any of the senses now? Okay, we've got taste. So for taste, we're going to talk about this in a lot more detail in one of the other days. But food, the minute something touches your tongue, again, very powerful associations, and it will do you a lot of good to bring yourself into your present when we are eating or taste or drinking something. We'll talk about that more on the day of eating meditation. That will be on Wednesday. But use these associations again. The simple taste of toothpaste in your mouth, easiest way to start a mindfulness practice. You will be surprised because we brush our teeth on autopilot, you'll be surprised to see where your brain is traveling while you're brushing your teeth. It's not going to be easy, I'm warning you. But if you try and say, I am brushing my teeth now, I can feel the toothpaste in my mouth, I can feel the bristles of the brush on my teeth, that is already a mindfulness practice. How many minutes ideally should I practice meditation every day? You know what? Toothbrushing should be 2 minutes long, according to most dentists. So that's a great start. Something like a traffic light is as long as the traffic light. But when we start to practice, even if you're doing 4 minutes, 2 minutes a day, that's a great start. What's much more important that you try and do it every single day. Do keep in mind there will be days like even I struggle sometimes on weekends and I forget. And then very quickly before I go to bed, I'll just lie down and do a 2-minute body scan before I fall asleep. And at least I feel like I've clocked that day in. It strengthens the practice. Again, researchers have found that doing 8 weeks of mindfulness practice brings significant benefits already. In fact, there is an 8-week course called Mindfulness-Based Stress Reduction. If any of you are very keen to find out more, that's a secular, evidence-based course that you can look up and do. You can do it as a lay person, and you can do it as a practitioner as well. That's about all I wanted to talk for today. If you want to know sort of what the benefits are besides the health benefits and let me say this a little personally. For anybody who knew me from before, I was always on the move, but I was also always agitated. I'm not going to say that, mindfulness is going to make you beatific and calm and speak slowly all the time. You will still remain the person that you are. But yes, I know my family's laughing at me for that because clearly I'm not that. But what it does do is help you stay centered. Every one of these roller coasters that our mind goes on, when you do fewer of those, your mind actually gets freed up to do so much more. You can see so much more. You can analyze so much more. Your worldview becomes a little wider as well. When you're anxious or when you're focused on just your problems, it's really hard to see the suffering of the person right next to you, and that includes even your partner, your children. Forget people in your environment. Forget people in the world. Become other regarding. I think you end up having a lot more fun. Simple pleasures can bring you so much joy. It's like saying, do I want a triple chocolate sundae with 5-6 toppings on top, or am I blissfully happy with a single scoop of vanilla ice cream? Believe it or not, that single scoop of vanilla ice cream will bring you that joy if you're truly enjoying it in the moment. Don't take my word for it. Please practice and see if it works for yourself. Becomes difficult to concentrate with a lot of anxiety and thoughts running in the mind. Absolutely right. It's like my client said, don't tell me to start breathing now, which is why that's something we're going to deal with tomorrow. Oh yeah, and before everybody goes, tomorrow we're going to do a walking meditation. So I'm going to be doing this from my phone, and we're going to do it, and I'm going to show you how you can use movement, because before you can get into a state where you want to still the mind, you need to first dispel the hormones. So very, very pertinent question. Thank you for that. We're going to learn how to dispel some of the hormones that are raging through our body and get us into a great state, but how that movement in itself can be mindfulness. So I hope you will join me tomorrow at 12:30 again. Do spread the word. For those who are missing this, we will in time. We are working right now remotely, but we will be converting these to YouTube videos, and you'll be able to find it on my YouTube channel. It goes by the name Sandhya Krishnan, so just Google it. You should be able, look for it on YouTube, and you'll be able to find it. I was going to say that mindfulness has made me a lot less forgetful, so I hope I haven't forgotten any of the things I wanted to say to you today, and I can find my glasses a lot faster as well. I mean, if that's not a reason to start a mindfulness practice, I don't know what is. Thank you, everybody, for joining me, and have a wonderful day. Reduce the amount of media inputs you have, and just practice, like I said, practice with the small things. Right now, I'm looking at leaves fluttering outside my balcony, and that's already reminding me to bring me into the present. So pick your talismans, pick your cues, share them with us tomorrow. Thank you so much, and bye-bye.